There's a moment quiet, almost invisible, when something inside an empath simply stops. Not a dramatic exit, no argument, no final confrontation. One day they're there, fully present, deeply invested, and then they're not. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that disappearance, you probably still don't understand what happened. But if you are that empath, you already know exactly what this is about. Because you didn't leave without reason. You left because staying had become something you can barely put into words. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from giving endlessly to someone who never once asked how you were holding up. Not because they were cruel. Sometimes they were kind. Sometimes they were even loving. But somewhere in the architecture of that relationship, your inner life had been quietly erased, and you let it happen. That's the part that stays with you. You told yourself it was patience. You called it compassion. You reframed their emotional unavailability as something you could heal with enough presence, enough warmth, enough of yourself poured in. But here's what was actually happening beneath all of that. The empath wasn't just absorbing emotions, they were slowly abandoning their own. Carl Rogers once described a phenomenon he called conditions of worth. The idea that we learn, very early in life, that love is conditional. That to be accepted, we must first be useful. That to belong, we must first earn it. And for an empath, that lesson lands differently. Because their gift, their deep sensitivity, their ability to feel what others feel, becomes the very currency they use to pay for connection. They don't give because they've been asked to. They give because giving feels like safety. And that distinction between genuine generosity and fear wearing the costume of generosity is one of the most painful things an empath can ever recognize in themselves. Because it means that all those years of showing up, of staying late in conversations that drained them, of setting themselves aside, weren't just love. They were also a strategy, a deeply unconscious strategy for avoiding the one thing they feared most: being too much, being unwanted, being left. If you've ever stayed in a conversation past the point of your own exhaustion, if you've ever swallowed your frustration to protect someone else's comfort, if you've ever felt guilty for having a need at all, then you already know what that currency costs. The strange thing is, most people in the empath's life never see it coming. Because the empath doesn't show the depletion. They've learned to perform stability even when they're dissolving inside. And that performance can go on for months, sometimes years, until it can't. There's a specific behavior, not a personality type, not a diagnosis, that triggers what might be the most decisive moment in an empath's psychology. And it's not cruelty. It's not betrayal in the obvious sense. It's consistent emotional dismissal. The conversation where your feelings were redirected back to theirs. The moment you tried to be honest and were met with deflection. The time you needed someone to simply stay with your pain, and instead they fixed it, minimized it, or disappeared from it, over and over, each time. A small withdrawal from something you didn't even know had a limit. And this is the part that makes it so disorienting. Because none of those individual moments feels catastrophic. You can rationalize each one. You can forgive each one. You can convince yourself that it wasn't that bad, that maybe you were asking for too much, that maybe the timing was wrong, that maybe next time will be different. But the body keeps count even when the mind refuses to. And somewhere beneath all the rationalizing, beneath all the generous interpretations and the patient waiting and the quiet hoping, a number is being tallied that you don't even know is being tracked. Until one day, it reaches zero. If this is landing somewhere specific in your chest right now, if a particular face or a particular moment is surfacing, you're not alone in that recognition. A lot of people watching this have never had a space to name exactly what happened to them. If this channel has ever given you that space, consider subscribing. This is the kind of conversation we return to here, again and again, from every angle. Because what happens next is where most people get confused. The empath doesn't leave in anger. Not usually. Anger would almost be easier. It has motion. It has direction. It says something clear. What actually happens is quieter. A kind of internal door closes. Not with force. Almost gently. Like something in the psyche finally says, I've been asking to be seen for a long time now, and I'm done asking. Psychologists call it self-concept collapse when the image you hold of yourself becomes incompatible with the life you're living. For an empath, that moment arrives when they realize, the version of me that exists in this relationship is not me. It's a performance, a survival adaptation, a self shaped entirely around another person's comfort. And once you see that, really see it, you can't unsee it. Here's what's almost cruel about this moment. It rarely looks like strength from the outside. The empath goes quiet, withdraws, stops initiating, becomes politely distant. And the person who triggered all of this often experiences the empath's retreat as coldness, as punishment, as something being done to them. They don't realize they're watching someone try to survive, because the empath isn't withdrawing to hurt anyone. They're withdrawing because continuing to stay, in the same way, at the same cost, would require them to disappear entirely. And something in them, something older than the conditioning, something Carl Rogers would have called the organismic self, the deepest knowing of who you actually are, refuses. That refusal is not vengeance. It's not even a decision, really. It's the psyche doing what it was always designed to do. Protect what's left of the person inside. There's a grief in this that doesn't get talked about enough, because the empath doesn't just leave the relationship. They leave a version of themselves they spent years constructing. The version that believed, if I give enough, if I understand deeply enough, if I stay patient long enough, I will finally be met. Letting go of that belief is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have. And yet, and this is where something shifts, there's something else waiting on the other side of that grief. Not healing in the clean, resolved sense. Not the sudden clarity you see in inspirational content. Something slower and stranger than that. A return not to who you were before. You can't go back, but toward something more fundamental. The self that existed before the performing began. The part of you that feels things without immediately assigning them a social function. The part that knows what it needs, even when it has no language for it yet. Rogers believed that human beings have a natural movement toward growth, not because they're told to grow, but because something in the organism always orients toward wholeness, the way a plant orients toward light even when the room is dark. The empath's disappearance isn't an ending. It's that orientation happening in real time. But here's the question that doesn't get asked enough, and maybe it's one worth sitting with. If the empath always had this capacity to protect themselves, what kept them from using it sooner? That's not a question with a comfortable answer, because the honest answer involves looking at what was in it for them too. The identity built around being the one who understands, the quiet power of being needed. The way that role, as painful as it was, also gave them a place to belong. There's a particular kind of safety in being indispensable. When you are the one who holds everything together, when you are the emotional anchor in someone else's chaos, you are never disposable. You are never replaceable. And for someone who has spent their life afraid of being abandoned, that role, however exhausting, feels like protection. So they stay, not just because they love the person, but because the role itself has become part of how they understand their own worth. And this is where the psychology gets uncomfortable. Because if your sense of value depends on being needed, then someone who doesn't need you, someone who is emotionally self-sufficient and present and whole, doesn't actually fit the internal template. The empath gravitates, often unconsciously, toward people with gaps, toward people whose emotional architecture has holes in it, not out of cruelty, but because those are the people who confirm what was learned so long ago, that love is earned through service. Leaving it means leaving not just the relationship, but the self-concept that organized their sense of worth. And that's not a small thing. That's an excavation. If you've made it this far in this video, if something in this reflection is sitting with you, not just intellectually, but somewhere more personal, I want to invite you to do something. Leave a comment below, not to perform insight, not to summarize what you learned, just to name one thing this brought up for you. That act of naming is itself part of the process, because what happens after the empath walks away, that's where the real story begins. The silence they enter isn't empty. It's loud with everything they suppressed, every feeling that was rerouted, every need that was reframed as unreasonable, every moment they shrank to make space for someone else. All of that comes back, not all at once, but steadily. And for the first time in a long time, they have to deal with themselves, not their usefulness, not their capacity to hold others, just themselves, their own unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable inner life. That confrontation can feel like falling apart, but it's actually the opposite. It's integration. The self that was scattered across the emotional landscapes of other people beginning to gather itself back, not into something harder or colder, into something more whole. And in that process, in the middle of all that quiet reconstruction, something surprising often happens. The empath starts to feel things they didn't know were missing, opinions that are entirely their own, not shaped by what someone else needed to hear, preferences they had silenced because asserting them felt like a risk, reactions, real, unfiltered reactions that arrive without the immediate reflex to soften them, reframe them, make them more palatable for the room. It's disorienting at first, because this is not who they were trained to be, but it's who they actually are. And that wholeness doesn't look like the empath disappearing from sensitivity. It looks like them learning to be sensitive with themselves first, to feel their own feelings before absorbing someone else's, to recognize the difference between empathy, a gift, and self-erasure, a wound disguised as a gift. That distinction changes everything, not overnight, not without grief, not without the complicated love still felt for the people they left behind. But the empath who has returned to themselves walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently. They stop being available in ways that cost them everything, not because they've become selfish, but because they've finally understood that you cannot genuinely give from a place of emptiness. What looks like generosity from an empty self is actually a transaction, a bid for belonging, a plea dressed as an offering. Real generosity, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, can only come from someone who has enough, and enough begins with the basic recognition that your inner life matters, that your feelings are real data, not inconveniences, that your needs are not negotiable accessories to personhood. They are the foundation of it. They still feel deeply, maybe more deeply, because they're no longer numbing themselves to survive proximity, but they feel from a different place, from ground, from presence, from something that doesn't need to be validated to exist. If what we explore here resonates with something you're moving through, give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't yet, not because of an algorithm, but because these conversations deserve to continue, and your presence in them matters. The behavior that makes an empath vanish isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly in the spaces between one unseen moment and the next, until the only honest response left is to become unreachable to the thing that was slowly erasing them. And maybe that's the thing worth remembering most. The disappearance isn't abandonment. It isn't cruelty. It isn't even a choice in the way we usually mean that word. It's something more fundamental than choice. It's a body, a psyche, a human being finally choosing, perhaps for the first time, to treat its own existence as worth protecting. There's something almost sacred in that, even when it hurts, even when the people left behind don't understand it, even when the empath themselves isn't entirely sure what they're moving toward, because the movement itself is the answer, not the destination, not the resolution, not the healed version waiting on the other side, but the act of finally, quietly, irrevocably refusing to vanish, even if that means disappearing from the room. And here's what I want to leave you with, not as a conclusion, but as something to carry. The next time someone important to you goes quiet, before you call it coldness, before you call it punishment, before you make it about what you've lost, consider the possibility that what you're witnessing is someone trying, for the first time in a long time, to stay alive as themselves, and ask yourself what that might have cost them.